Recording. All right, Mr. Boobles, kick us off, man.
All right. So this week on the Agile Wire, we've got Amber Field. Amber, we've known each other from meetups, over the last couple of years. And why don't you, Amber, just give the listeners an introduction of yourself and some of your background that you have?
Sure. Hi, everyone. So I am the director of software development right now at a company called SingleWire. We make mass emergency notification systems for schools, hospitals, company, pretty much you name it. We've got customers in that sector. And I'm also a lecturer right now at UW-Madison. We're teaching a capstone course that just started in the fall, virtually. My background is in software development. So I'm a CS grad from UW. Love Madison, moved away for quite some time after I graduated, and I worked for IBM. I worked for National Geographic. I worked for Capital One. I worked for a small company called O-Power that got acquired by Oracle. And along the way, I kind of went from being a software developer to being really interested in project management to taking my first Scrum Master course and drinking the Kool-Aid like crazy to helping National Geographic do their transformation from waterfall to Agile, to leading a PMO at O-Power, where we were doing some scaled Agile, a la Spotify model, basically out there, to leading the operations for Capital One's Innovation Lab, to coming back home here. So I've kind of run the gamut on the whole product cycle, and am now kind of focused on, well, how do we turn some of these companies in the Midwest into really, really efficient companies, and how do we get the students ready to actually work with them? So that's a little bit about me.
Awesome. And I know, the first talk I saw you give was on team self-selection, and that was a few years ago. And I was really excited after seeing them, and I've had some exposure to it, but not like big time with a number of teams. And you kind of got me into it and got me thinking and helped me with some guidance on how to actually get started doing that. And now I've run a couple of those with some different clients. And I don't know, I thought that might be a good place for us to start. And then we can see where the conversation goes from there. So what do you... When I say team self-selection, what does that mean to you? Let's just maybe break it down for our listeners.
Yeah, so what that means to me is there's a really slick process out there called self-selection that allows large groups of people to choose what they work on and who they work with. And it works really, really well in an Agile environment where you're trying to come up with teams or squads, whatever you want to call them, and align people in a new way. So there are a lot of different reasons why you might want to try self-selection. One is you might be setting up a brand new division with a bunch of teams that you need to seed. That's a pretty easy one to use it for. One is you've got stale teams that people have just been working in forever, and a lot of people want to do something different. And how do you shake things up a little bit? Another one is when you're moving from waterfall to Agile and you're forming these teams in the beginning. How do you make sure that the right people get in with the right folks and you form those teams properly? And there's a couple other good reasons to do it. I know that I was first exposed to this at Agile 2015. One of the authors of a book called Creating Great Teams, David Moll, he was speaking at that conference and said, kind of off to the side, we've done this cool self-selection thing. And I ended up finding him at a buffet after the talk and asking him just, tell me a little bit more about this. This sounds really cool. And, at the time I was at O-Power already, and we weren't ready for anything like this. We'll get into it a little bit, I'm sure, on this podcast. But when you first tell people, go ahead, pick your own teams, they get a little bit nervous about it. Mm-hmm. Maybe not even a lot nervous about it. And so I started reading up on it, couldn't convince my business to try it until we went through a series of layoffs and that left the teams just completely imbalanced. And so that's a good time to do it too, when morale is low, when you've got these teams that don't work anymore, and you want to try to figure out a way to both raise morale and fill your teams properly. Self-selection works really well.
Yeah, I just did it where we were basically taking what was one product, and we've now decided these are two separate actually products, two code bases, two different markets we're serving. As we spent on this thing became very big, and we're selling it differently. And so we say the same people, but we need to figure out who's going to work on which product. We know what the guardrails are and what teams sizes we need to have, but we wanted to give a choice to people. So that was another reason, right? So it's that's the unbundling. And then there's also bundling where it's like, hey, maybe I've also had it where it's like, oh, everyone's allocated, 25% to over 9 or 10 different teams, but let's just create some real cross-functional teams aligned around product backlogs and can, reduce the number of teams. And that's also another great case, to do team self-selection.
So you were saying, sorry, you were saying people get nervous. I was curious, who gets nervous and why do you think they get nervous?
Pretty much almost everyone in my experience gets nervous, from management who doesn't get to pick who goes on the teams down to the people that are actually picking. I've actually had people come up to me and say, I'd much rather management just do this for me. Even though this is a very empowering thing to tell you, go pick who you want to work with and what you want to work on. It just makes people nervous. I think we're just not used to it. We're not used to being given that amount of trust from both our management team and everyone else around us. And it also doesn't seem at first like it'll work until you go through it once and realize actually it really does. It works really well.
Yeah, the part of the reason I was asking is I had a funny experience literally just this past week where, so I'm the product owner. I'm meeting with a couple of more of the senior team members, and we're just kind of talking through like some bigger features that are coming up, a pretty big change that we're going to be making architecturally. And I was like, okay, well, what if we did this? What if we had some of the more senior people kind of heads down in this area because they're going to be shadowing, or we've got some new people that we're bringing on board, and so they want to do some pairing, get those people up to speed, get them into the code base, et cetera. And I was like, would it be okay if maybe we put these few people over here and just kind of gave them some focus for the next few weeks here? And one of them was like, why are we giving the PO the ability to split our team? I'm like, whoa, I wasn't even talking about splitting the team here. So it's like the exact opposite of that. Like if any manager came into the room, or anybody who they perceived as organizational power trying to step on the toes of the self-organizing cross-functional development team, like they just come out guns a-blazing and they're like, Jeff, you better back the fuck off. All right. This is our realm right here. So I love it, but that's kind of what I'm used to. It's been a little while since I've done the self-organizing thing with new clients.
Yeah, and that's kind of, if you have a management team that comes at you and says, back the fuck off, that's a really good sign that your organization might not be ready for self-selection. They might not be ready for agility either at that point. You've really got to get people to the point where they feel like it's safe enough to try. They might not be totally on board, but if you can get them to admit, oh yeah, we'll try it, and maybe there's a backup plan. Maybe if no one likes it, or the teams are imbalanced, or something goes terribly wrong, we try something else later. If everyone agrees to that can work. And it takes some time to do that too. I always tell people it takes about 3 to 6 weeks to set everything up for self-selection. So you need to start talking about it maybe 6 weeks ahead of time, get people comfortable with it, and be prepared to talk to a bunch of the individuals, because they're all going to have very different questions and their own concerns about it. The best way to get them over the hump is to just pull them aside and let them voice those concerns, and then talk through, what's going to happen and why you feel it might not, and what you've experienced in the past.
So 6 weeks, that seems like a lot. Like what's your experience with that? What are some of the things that tactically you're doing during that time, like as preparation to actually doing the event, right?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the fastest I've ever done it has been about 3 weeks, and that was that O-Power incident where we had just gone through the layoff and we needed to figure out what the teams were going to be ASAP. When you have enough time, what you'll do is you'll hold a kickoff, and this is after you convince the management team that this is a good idea. So it could actually take a lot longer than that to get to that point. But once they're on board, you hold a kickoff meeting. You you tell everyone what you're going to do. You take questions in front of everyone so everyone understands, what are other people's fears and what are the answers to those fears. And then you leave some time for those one-on-ones. But in the meantime, you're also getting ready for the event. So we haven't talked a little bit about the mechanics, which we can do later. But in order to get to the event, you need to be prepared with, okay, what are your teams going to be? Who's going to lead those teams? You usually have a product owner or product manager associated with those teams from the get-go. You figure out what your rules are. What mix of people do you want? What mix of skills? How big are the teams? There is one rule that we always have, which is do what's best for the company. So you you prepare those, you make sure people understand those, and you get them to create some materials about themselves so they can share a little bit about their skill set during the actual self-selection event.
Yeah, I think I know in my experience, this client that I just recently did it with, like, introduced the idea over a year ago, way before we were even engaged, and then been talking about it about every couple months with different people. And then they're like, okay, at first we were kind of that we were scared. The self-organization thing, I guess we were okay with. Self-selection is a whole nother thing, and that self-management thing, we're not even close to ready for that type of stuff later. So this is the next step. And they're like, I think we're ready for that, when this opportunity came up. And I think for us, it was more like, I think we did about 4 weeks. We're like, yep, okay, now we got to nail those guardrails, get that approved, start communicating it. But I don't know if, Jeff, this is where you were going. What I probably could have did better is set the guardrails of, like, we shouldn't be talking to every single person and, like, kind of seeing where they're thinking they want to go. And, like, I don't know, there's a little bit of steering that was happening, and we had to, like, re-baseline everybody kind of when we got into that event. And I kind of wish that didn't go as far as it did.
Yeah, actually, I've experienced that too. If you share the teams ahead of time, there will be some politicking, and they'll come to the room thinking, I want to be with this person, I want to be on this team. And that's not necessarily healthy, because in order to get to a place where we've done what's best for the business, it might be that those people that really want to work together will be split up for a good reason. And I've done this a couple of times where people have thought about what they want to do ahead of time, and then they get very disappointed that they're not with the person. They usually get over it by the end of the event, but that is a real downside to sharing some of this information ahead of time, because we naturally as humans want to form alliances, and we want to get things set so that we know what's going to happen. We want a little bit of control, right?
So those guardrails, then, you don't share those until the day of the event with everybody on the teams?
Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. I try to read the room a little bit.
Okay.
And I do share them. I'm pretty clear ahead of time that it's best just to read them to yourself and not be trying to wheel and deal, because things change in the moment during the iterative event. I actually did this in the class that we're doing right now. There's 3 projects, 6 different teams that need to be formed. So we did a self-selection event fully virtually, and I did share those projects ahead of time so that the students could think through the questions that they had ahead of time. In past events, when you're talking about doing this at work, where people have a stake in their old teams and they have titles and they have pieces of themselves that they really care about, it's much better not to share it ahead of time. That's what I found.
Mm-hmm.
So that's interesting. I didn't think about. So I was just jotting down some notes here. So thinking about the product or the goals, thinking about the rules that you're going to place, giving people an opportunity to think about the skill sets that they're bringing to the table. And you mentioned a little bit about the buy-in from management or leadership in the organization. What you were just saying at the end there was something about the roles, and it made me think back to Army. When I was going through officer candidate school, everybody's an OC, everybody's an officer candidate. Doesn't matter what your prior service was, it didn't matter what your rank was. Everybody is an OC when they hit officer candidate school, which is interesting. And I can see why they do that. What has your experience been with really trying to level the playing field then when you're walking into there? Because clearly people have organizational authority. They've got roles in the organization. They've got titles that go along with it. What have you done to try and just level the playing field with that, to try and encourage people, regardless of what your title is at the company, everybody's equal in this process?
Yeah, well, we've thought through pretty long and hard about what the structure is going to be after self-selection. Are people going to switch managers? Are they going to keep their same managers? How open is the business to allowing people to change job titles? Because if you're in a large company with a lot of bureaucracy, sometimes that's very difficult, and there's compensation implications as well. Mm-hmm. And so understanding what the appetite is in whatever company you're doing this for major changes is really, really important. And starting to talk to people and setting the tone for, all right, you're going to keep your manager, or we are actually going to change. So think that through as part of this is really, really important, because your manager is probably one of the most important people at work in terms of whether you're happy or not. And people need to know ahead of time, like how this is going to affect that relationship that they have, and kind of plan accordingly. So we talk through some of that, and we try to talk through some of the possibilities. So I talk about some past experiences that I've had. I've had engineers turn into BAs and totally shock their management team, but in a very delightful way. I've had engineers decide that they're going to take on completely new languages and learn something completely new. And as long as the business can absorb that learning time, which is something you want to talk through ahead of time, then that's great. That's exactly what you want to see. You want to see someone growing and taking on something new.
Mm-hmm. So do you, sorry, I keep hogging this, Jeff. One last question here, because I'm really intrigued by it. In your experience, have you had the managers participate in the room during the self-organization, or has it been, we're going to determine, we're going to set the expectation up front? I guess I'll leave it at that. How have you gone about that?
Yeah, most of the time we kick the managers out, especially if they're not part of the teams that you're choosing, because they and anyone above that level, people just behave very differently when those folks are in the room. And even if it's subconsciously, you know that they're watching you, and people will sometimes do what they think their manager wants them to do and not what they actually want to do themselves. And it's really important that you get people comfortable into a place where they can truly choose what they want to do next. This is one of the only times in life when you'll get that opportunity. At most places you just don't. So we had one instance where the teams were made up of, we pinned a product manager and an engineering manager to the teams ahead of time, because they worked very closely together on those teams. They knew those products like the back of their hands. And our structure was that the engineers on those teams reported up into that engineering manager. So in that case, we actually did have them participate, because they played a really important role in answering questions about the product and answering questions about the skills that were needed, and were truly part of that team versus kind of an external, just people manager type of manager. So in that sense, it actually made sense there. But every other time, we kick them out. We have them participate in the beginning. They might hear the pitches, and then we usher them out of the room.
That's really cool that the managers are there, and you're really doing team self-selection and manager self-selection. Yep. You're getting to select your own manager. That first company that Jeff and I did it with, that's what they talked about doing too in the future, is like a manager self-selection. After they had some experience with team self-selection, that was something they were open to. So I don't know. I think that's a pretty cool thing too. Like you said, it's one of the most important things to make you happy at your job is to have a good manager, or at least it can discourage you pretty quickly. And so if you get to pick, I think that's a pretty awesome thing. Another thing that I had an interesting thing in the last one that I just did, the product owner was also the manager for many of the people. And what we decided to do was to have the person there, and they did like a product pitch, for their product. And they were there in the beginning to help set the guardrails along with a director of that area. And then they both left. But the product owner was available for like an on-call basis, where like, if we have questions, if we want to get some alignment, we're going to call you and have you bring in. Can you just not schedule any meetings over the next few hours in case we need this time back with you? And she's like, yeah, I love it. We'll work on a bunch of other stuff. And we ended up having to call her in and she answered some questions and gave some clarity, and it was great. But like, I think it was great having the team have that space without a manager there too. So I think this is one of those fine areas. You have to know your team, your environment, but not having him there is probably where I would lean over having him there in most cases.
That's really interesting, and I'm really glad to hear that worked out really well. I think that's kind of the best of both worlds, really. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, we touched on the process a little bit. Should we talk about exactly what happens during self-selection so that gaps filled in?
Yeah, definitely.
I don't know. I feel like I've been talking a lot. So
No. Sorry, I just wanted to just want to make sure we tie a bow on the setup, right? So we're thinking about the product, the areas that we're wanting to give focus to. We've set the rules. Do what's best for the company. I like that North Star statement in there. Maybe setting that up so everybody's aligned around that. Everybody's got the skills that they have, and we've gotten buy-in from the organizational leadership. So I would say, yep, the next step in that process is how do we actually do it then? So take it away.
So I like to start in the afternoon personally, like so that we're going to end at the end of the day so we can do a happy hour. So that's how I like to have it set up. Do you do the same thing, Amber?
Do the same thing. I think there's like either that or having some sort of team building activity right after is really key.
Yep. So the way I like to do it is, so you start with an intro where somebody from leadership is coming in and blessing this thing, saying, here's why we're doing this. This is why I'm backing it. Here's what I hope you get out of it. Do what's best for the company, but also do what's best for you. Like, we want you to be happy. We want you to be engaged. Like, that's the message I want them to send. And usually I'm coaching them up. I'm like, here's why we do this. Here's why you should do it. And they've already heard it so many times from me that, maybe they have their own reasons, but like I give them plenty of reasons to go through this whole entire thing before they've agreed to it. And so they're kind of echoing some of the main things that are important to them. What do you do next? I'm assuming you do the same thing, right? The first thing is kind of...
And I love that idea of having the executives come in and bless the whole thing. The higher up you can get, the better. And then we kick them out.
Yep.
Yep.
And they know this ahead of time, so they're not offended. And, when we do this with multiple locations or we do it completely virtually, we usually have some tracking device online. And I use Trello a lot. We've used spreadsheets in the past. But I don't even give the executives access to that. I don't want them to see anything and be able to ping someone along the way or anything like that. It's in their best interest. They just sometimes don't know it yet because when they come back in the room, usually they're very happy with what they see. So kick them out. And then we end up doing our pitches for the team. So whoever is ending up leading those teams, it's usually the product manager, product owner. Sometimes it's been a different role, just depending on the actual organization. They'll go through and they'll talk through, here's what my team does, and here's why you should be on the team. It's a little bit of salesmanship there, which some people are really good at and some people aren't. But product owners tend to be pretty good at it because that's a big part of their job anyway, is telling stakeholders, here's what I think we should do and here's why I think we should do it. So.
Yeah, I like I try to add some fun to it and be like, hey, pretend you're in Sharktank and you're a startup and you're trying to get funding. Like, give it like a startup speech, like to your team. Yeah. Like, they're going to appreciate something like that. Something that's polished, that's, concise, that you've practiced, a few times. And then that's, conveying your vision. I've also sometimes I have people do like a lean canvas and like actually show that to talk through their product and say, here's how we serve our market. Here's why we're different. And even people that have worked in the product for a long time tend to learn something by walking through that.
Yeah, we always have some sort of one pager, and it usually consists of, here's the team, here's a quick blurb about it, here are the skills that I think I need for this team, and something fun, like this is the team's mascot, or, this is my spirit animal, that sort of thing. It is fun because during the event, you'll have some downtime to go read some of these things that people put up. And it's always fun to have something interesting being said about the team and about the people. So, yeah.
Nice. All right. So I do that where we do the product pitches after we've done the blessing. And this is one where I think it's from what I've read from different people doing different things. This is optional. But I like to give people a canvas, especially doing it virtual this last time. I felt like I needed to give them a canvas to assess their skills and to have something that they could show to their team and saying, here's what I bring to the table. So I did a very simple exercise. I used Mural this last time. And which is just a collaboration tool. And everybody had like a page basically with a table on it and a cloud. And then they put their skills they bring to the table on the table, the things that are kind of hidden underneath the table, and the things they aspire to have in the future up in the cloud. And then they put their picture on there, and they had about 20 minutes to do that, 20 minutes to a half hour to fill this out, really be thoughtful on it. And then that's what they used, and they started forming the teams and selecting. It was like, this is my ticket if I'm going on this team. And we had like an area for the teams.
I love that. I think that's probably the most creative, person one pager I've heard of for this. That is so cool. So, if you read Creating Great Teams, they say all you really need is a picture. So you could have people print out their pictures. You could print out the pictures, which probably works better. and that's all you need. But I love the idea of the one pager on themselves. That's a really cool idea. We've done just a PowerPoint slide with different blocks, like tell us about the skills you have, tell us about your goals and aspirations, tell us something interesting about yourself. We might dive in and say, give us like a hobby, list your hobbies, list your favorite movies, that sort of thing. Something that people can read during the event and get to know one another at a deeper level than they might have otherwise.
Yeah.
And this last time what I used a Trello board, and I had all of the students create cards. They put their pictures as their cover picture. So their pictures were really, really big on the card. And then you had to click into the card and you could see, I think I asked them what their favorite class was, what their favorite languages were, and a couple other things about them. And so they all filled that out. And it worked really well because here you had just a column basically that said, I don't have a team, and it's got everyone in it in the beginning. And they just click and move that over during the event, and that's basically their selection. Whereas if you're not virtual, usually you're in a room with all of your colleagues, and you've got physical pieces of paper and some tape, and you've got areas on the wall or in the room where your teams are listed. And if you want to join that team, you walk over and put your picture or your mural cloud thing up on the wall, and that's how you join it.
And people tend to stand near their team once they've selected that team too. So you kind of start to see this team form and how they're, chatting with each other and stuff too when it's in the same room. Yeah, that's cool. So you have to have I think the thing is you have to have some kind of indicator of who you are and what team you're on. And it can't just be like, yep, I'm on that team and let's write my name down. You need to be able to like pick it up and like move it from team to team because you are going to possibly move it. And we only want one of these tokens, per person.
Yep. Yeah, so you've got this thing and you've had the pitches. And the next step is to throw some time up on a clock and say, go pick your teams, basically.
How much time you give them?
10 minutes is what I usually give mine. What about you, Jeff?
I did a little longer on the first one. I did like 15 minutes for the first round, and maybe it was like 10 or something. I kind of for like reviewing it afterwards. And so what I do here, so the first round is like people just go and pick their teams. And so I know like I definitely say do what's best for the company. But in the first round, we're going to have 3 rounds of this. Do what's best for you. Like, let's try to like align those things as close as we possibly can. And then if we have to get to the third round, we're going to pick hands over company over individual if we need to. Like we need to take what's best for the team, what's best for the product, what's best for the company. Because that's, we're going to be really happy if we're all successful. And so what the first round, then I'm letting them go and pick where they want to go. And I'm expecting there to be imbalances with the guardrails. And so I just had like a checklist next to the guardrails next to each team. And during the review part, once that first time box is done, I just walk through and I'm like, do you get a check mark or do we do a red sticky or a green sticky? Which one are we putting on here? Did we meet it or did we not? And it's okay if we get some red ones in the first round. And I just walk through each team and just ask, did we meet this? Did we meet this? And we look at the team and we like, as a group, everyone's like reviewing this together and it's yes, no, yes, no. It's kind of like a big peer review. And then we kind of march through the teams. And then do you do something similar? I'll stop there before I get into the second round.
Yeah, I do, hands down. So I think at a higher level, like what I want everyone to know is that this is an iterative process. And this was what we were just talking about as round 1. And then once we get through what Jeff just said, which is the checking off, like, did we meet all of our rules for all of our teams? Are the team size is correct? Are the right skills on the teams? Whatever other rules you have. Sometimes it's we need 2 QA on each team, et cetera, et cetera. You lay out, here are the gaps, and you don't really say much else. Mm-hmm. And then you start the second round. So you'll put 10 minutes or so on the clock and watch what people do. And what usually happens in that second round, Jeff?
No one moves, or very few.
I knew you would
like,
say
there's one more round. I'm just going to just stay here and see what happens is what they look around and say to each other, I think. And so that's why I try to make that second round a little shorter because it's going to happen. But also I try to nudge a little bit and do a little bit more facilitation at second round and just trying to like make sure people are starting to have that conversation and just starting to play with how are they going to relieve some of these, these issues that we have on the guardrails. How about you? What do you do?
I pretty much do the same thing. I try to get a little bit of the mediation done in the second round, but I do not expect anyone to move because everyone's just kind of waiting for someone else to make the move. They're like, well, everyone's got a second choice from my experience and from talking to people afterwards. They've all got a second choice, but they'd rather not be the first one to pick their second choice, right? If they can hold on to their first choice, they'll do it. That's just human nature, and I think that's fantastic. And I've seen this play out over the I've done this probably a dozen times, not dozens, a dozen times. I've seen it play out almost every single time. The same is second round is super boring. No one moves. It looks like this thing is going to crash and burn. And then you do the same thing, right? After the second round, you're saying, okay, well, here's the gaps. There's probably one person that moved. So there's usually some good news. And you talk a little bit more about what needs to happen in order to get us through this third round. I think technically you do not have to stop at 3 rounds. You can keep going and going and going, but I have never gone beyond 3 rounds. It's always come to a natural finish at 3.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I always have it in my back pocket, like, if we're just so close and we just feel like we need, I know if we could just have one more, like, I'll throw one more in there, but I don't never say that. I really try to keep it to 3 because that same point, like, what happened in the second round, I think what happened in the third round if they knew there was a fourth round, right? So, like, you don't want to delay it for another couple rounds just to have people just kind of sitting there waiting until they have to make a decision. And so when you get into the third round, the next thing that I think is important is that people know if they don't make a choice, somebody's going to make the choice for them. And it's going to be the product owner. It's going to be somebody else. And so you have, 15 minutes, let's just say, or 20 minutes, maybe we give them a little longer. So usually I give them longer in the third round, but sometimes even like 25 minutes, depending on how many teams we're talking about. It's like, we need to get this figured out in this time. And if we don't, it's going to get picked for you. And the one that Jeff and I did a while ago, we were so close. We had 2 people that were like at the end of the time box and they just did not want to move. And so we facilitated it. We facilitated back and forth. And one person just said, I'm not moving. You'll have to pick. And the other one's like, well, I really want to be there, but I'll be flexible. I just hope that I get the opportunity to work on this team in the future. So I don't know. They moved and I was like, okay, well, I guess, it worked out. They figured it out. And it's been great, I think, for everybody involved from that point forward. And so people take different things that they're maybe, like you said, and they're not like, I don't love this, but I think I'm probably the best person for this. And sometimes just being good at something does make them happy, and they find joy in that, afterwards.
Yeah, so we tend to do surveys after all of these to find out, are you actually happy now that no one else is looking and no one else is making you do anything? Are you actually happy with the team that you're on? That's the first question I always ask. And it's either 100% of folks are happy, or if there's one person that's not super happy with it. But I think one of the reasons why everyone's happy, even though there's always that person that wants to work on a different team and then walks back and goes either back to the team that they were in because they have special skills, or to another team that they weren't as excited about, they're even happy. And I think it's because this is a very public ceremony. And so they literally are taking one for the team, but they are seen as a hero with their peers because they're solving this problem. And we all know that you wanted to do something else, but you're taking a hit and you're going back, and everyone appreciates that. And I think just having that recognition in a very public way makes people more excited about where they were at than they used to be. And I see it happen a lot of times with people who were on the team and end up having to go back to that team, but yet they're happier with that team because they've at least had the chance to say where they want to go. And even though we kick managers out, I think it's important to share with them those sorts of anecdotes. Mm-hmm. Hey, Jeff really wanted to be on team A, but he ended up on team B. Let's work on figuring out how to get him there in the next 6 months to a year so that he doesn't get bored.
Right.
And that can, I think this can really drive some of those conversations forward in a way that just having those conversations with your manager wasn't working in the past.
Or this person stepped up but took a role that like we needed somebody to take it, no one wanted to take it. Yeah. And they don't have the skill yet, but they're inspiring to learn it. Like, let's be patient with them because no one else was willing to take this. Like, and they were willing to step up and take one, right, for the team and try something new So, let's give them all the support we can give them, through this like that. So I think those are definitely conversations that I've had in the past, as people have selected different teams to go on and different things happen and, some backstory behind it,
Yeah.
What's the range that you've done this with previously, Amber? Sorry, the range of people that have participated in this.
Like role wise, or?
No, I'm thinking like 20 to 200 people.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So I've done this with anywhere from about 40 up to 100 personally. And I know that the folks that have written that Creating Great Teams book have done it up to 200. And the only difference with the size is how long it might take. So with that 200 person, development group, that might be an all day occurrence or ceremony. And with the smaller ones, I don't think mine have ever gone more than half a day. Mm-hmm. It's always been done in time for happy hour. It might be done a little early. We might go early, or we might wait and then go after, at 4 o'clock or 4:30. We've done it in a couple of hours with pretty fairly large teams, like 60-person, 70-person teams, that get good at it. So there are some instances where you might want to run this multiple times. I don't recommend it with regular development teams because it takes them so long to become a high-performing team, to go through that Tuckman model of, storming, norming, performing, that sort of thing. So I generally tell people, don't do this more than maybe once a year if you've got, big roadmap changes or something like that. But in an environment like Capital One's Innovation Lab, where we're constantly working on new projects, very short projects, we're proving out whether they work or we're killing them right away. There is kind of a constant influx of new projects and new needs for skills and new needs for teams. And so we were actually running these every quarter, and that worked out pretty well for them. So the more these people were running the ceremonies, the better they got at it. The more they knew what would happen, they knew they'd be taken care of. They knew this wasn't a long-term thing, and they were able to do it really quickly.
There's this one story that this one director that I worked with when I was consulting, he was at a different organization. He told me a story about how they would do team self-selection every week based off the work, because it was very different, a dynamic. And he had hundreds of people, and they would self-select every week on Mondays. They said, this is the work, this is the order. Oh, you need these skills over here to hit this items, these to this, we'll take this. And they just figured it out every week, and they just were really good at it. So I think that's extreme. I've never heard of anyone else doing it like that, but but it can be done. It's been done.
It can be done. Yeah. And it just, I was going to say earlier when you're talking about people, like one or two people maybe not being super happy. One of the things I've noticed gets people over that hump of, is this safe to try? Or that hump of, I can go over to this team versus this other one, is you can always tell people, we'll evaluate this in 6 months. And if there's a large amount of people that aren't happy, we can either do it again or we can do something completely differently. And that usually gets people to a place where they're like, okay. And then what I've noticed is 100% of the time that I've done this, and we've had the teams running for 6 months, and we go back and we send out a survey, or we talk to each individual and we try to figure out if it's working or not, they're all happy where they're at. All the time. I've never gone back and 6 months later had to do another self-selection event because the teams weren't working out. There's something interesting about the way that we as humans can figure these things out for ourselves. And it's not just that we get the right amount of people on the team and the right mix of people of skills. It's that we tend to subconsciously actually mix up the personalities in the right way. You don't end up with a team with all type A, like gung-ho, really loud folks. You get a really good mix of introverts and extroverts and people that work well together. And for whatever reason, we, I think, intrinsically figure out who we want to work with and how do we form these teams. And that to me is one of the most fascinating things that has come out of these events, is watching just all of the aspects of these teams that were formed and how good they are, and how in many ways, as I'm a manager now, and as being part of some of the management teams of the past, I could not have done a better job. There's no way. And yet they did this in an afternoon all by themselves.
I was going to say, not only could you not have done a better job, but it would have taken you significantly longer to try and come up with that perfect Excel spreadsheet that took all the variables into account.
And not only could you have not done it better, the change management you could have never done better because they're bought in because they did it. The one that I just did now, like I was actually pretty surprised. Like we got done, we scheduled 4 hours to do it. We got done in 2.
Nice.
And I was like, okay, are we missing something? And I just kept posing questions like, what happens if this happens? Well, there's a high likelihood this is going to happen. How would we handle that? What would you do? Like management's not going to solve this for you anymore. I'm like, well, if this scenario happens and then that scenario happens, we're going to have to redo this again in 3 to 6 months. And I'm like, are we okay with that? Because it's good now, but we can make a change right now where we'd be in a better shape to handle some of this stuff. And they're like, no, I think we're good now because there's so much uncertainty that we'll readjust because we can't plan for, what 50% chance something might happen because it might only be 10. Let's just wait. Then let's do what's best right now, and then we'll adjust later. And I'm like, okay, well then, and then I'm like, and what if that one thing happens and you just somebody does it for you next time? And they're like, we'll be okay with that. And so like as a group, they decided that, and they can't just blame management. They're like, oh, they did this, and now we had to rip these teams apart 3 months later or something like that. I mean, they had a great team conversation around it, which I thought was awesome. The other thing that I thought was interesting doing it virtual, I'm curious to see how you did this. Like normally when you do it in person, there's small little conversations happening in different parts of the big room. And when you do it in virtual, you have one channel for voice communication. And so what I did is I used Zoom and we made everybody a co-host and you could go into different breakout rooms. And we just said, okay, these breakout rooms are here. So if it's like, hey, Jeff, I need to have a conversation with you. We need to figure out who's going on which team. Let's go to breakout room 3. No one's in there right now. We jump over there. We'd have our conversation. Then we move our cards. And then we tell everybody what we did and why we did it. I set this all up. They used it before. They know how to use breakout rooms. They've done this all before. So there's no education problem, but no one used the breakout rooms. They're just like, no, let's just talk about it one-on-one. And they just they passed it around. And I don't know, it worked for them, but they wanted to do it together. So it was interesting.
I think that is interesting. And, I didn't have a super different experience. So we were using Blackboard Collaborate, which is something that UW just got Zoom, and I was all set up with this other thing. And they also have breakout rooms. And I just opened up 10 of them. We were forming 6 teams. And we had 3 sets of mentors. So people from the companies who had brought to us projects for these students to work on. And so I said, all right, American Family is going to be in one room, Epic's going to be in another room, and Capital One's going to be in another room. If you have questions for them, go into those rooms, ask them. People did go in and out of those rooms. And then I had the extra breakout rooms open. I said, hey, in theory, we could have, team 1 through 6 in these rooms. You could pop out, you could talk to your team. And you're right, not a whole lot of people did that. Some teams did gather in a room. They'd say, hey guys, they chatted. They'd say, we're going to go in room 5. And they all just sneak over there. But no one used the extra rooms for one-on-one conversations. I think they were chatting. I doubt they were doing much else. I don't know. There is a difference between students and folks in the, I don't know, I don't want to call it the real world, but like
professional world, let's call it maybe, or something.
Professional world. And the students I've noticed are excellent chatters. Like they'll chat back an answer to a question instead of turning their microphone on and speaking it. And so I think that's what they were doing to get through the whole process. And it worked for us. The one interesting thing, side note, that I've noticed between doing it with professionals and doing it with students is the students, they found it very easy to pick teams and spread out and just kind of make it work. And my theory is that they're not tied down by baggage like your title and your past job and your skills. And they didn't know each other all that well. Some of them have been in other classes together, but we had a couple of sessions where they could get to know each other, and that's pretty much it. So they had a lot less tied to being on a specific team than I think sometimes we do in the professional world. And that made it go much, much more smoothly, to be honest.
So when Jeff and I teach classes, some of the classes, they do team self-selection. So who you're going to work with for the next couple of days. And what I found is like when we're in person and they're already sitting at tables, if you say you need to select teams, nobody moves, or maybe 1 or 2 people move if you're lucky. But if you say, everybody stand up, move to the back of the table, here are your guardrails, and you need to select teams, it's a whole different experience. It's more like what we talked about earlier in the podcast, where it's loud, it's noisy, people are mixing up, they're having all kinds of conversations. And that's, I think, a much much more real situation that I want them to have or feeling. And I think about that with the professional aspect of it too. Like if you make it too easy to stay with one team, I think people will just be comfortable and they'll just stick there. So you have to get them in an area where it's they can feel comfortable trying something new, like that there is some type of change that's going to happen, and that they just can't say, yeah, I'm just going to sit back on the same team I've always been on and not have anything happen to me.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because I literally just last week, actually, you and I were chatting about this. I had 2 PSF courses, and they were fairly large, like 28 people, and I think 30 in the other one. And it was a very similar situation where, just like we were saying, it created, I think, 6 breakout rooms. And then to start everything off, I explained the guardrails and put them all into one. And because they were our India teams, I'm not very familiar with how those teams are laid out. But I kind of got the feeling they all just kind of went with the same old teams that they were in. And kind of leading me to what you were just talking about was I was kind of curious, what from a facilitator standpoint could I do a little bit differently now that it is this virtual? I don't really know, right? That's one of the other tricky things about Zoom is when you kick everybody into the breakout room, you lose transparency into what's going on with all of those. And so that was another kind of tricky aspect of trying to be a facilitator for these types of events. So I was kind of curious if, having you two both have had experience now in the virtual, what kind of tips and tricks are you coming up with being that facilitator when you're trying to do this and not having the same visibility or transparency when you're in the room with everybody at the time?
What do you think, Amber?
I know what I did this last time was I called up one of my friends who's done a couple of self-selections with me, and I said, hey, would you come and join me? I'd really like another set of eyes, someone that really understands the process, that can bounce from room to room and help mediate or help point out where things are not going well or that sort of thing. And that worked really, really well. If you had probably 3 of you would be ideal in many situations that can just jump around and randomly, even if you're not sure where the conversations are happening, go into room 1 and then go into room 2 and then go into room 3 and just take a lay of the land and make sure that everything's going well. I think that was really key in helping me. I don't think I could have done it all by myself, even though the group that we were working with was pretty small. It was 26 students that we're picking.
So I've found this pretty cool hack. Actually, I would say that Chad and Bayer and I myself found it together. Chad probably more than me. We were experimenting together. And if you in Zoom create a different instance in an incognito window, so you have different tabs up for each, and we just call them breakout room 1, 2, 3, 4, but they're different users, and you put them into each of the breakout rooms, and you mute them. You can listen you're the instructor sitting in front of the room, everyone's talking over each other, and they just come in all kind of jumbled, you're sitting there listening to everybody, in a regular classroom. And then you can mute these people and be like, hey, I don't want to listen to you. I want to listen to group 3. What are they saying over there? And be like, oh wait, 3, you're way off. This is not what we're looking for. And then, and I feel it's kind of the instructor walking up to your table, but in a group exercise, which is great. But if I was to go sit at your table after I've given you instructions, that'd be kind of weird as the instructor. That's not normal. There's 5 teams and you're sitting with our team. What's going on with our team? Or we're the troublemakers, I guess, and people would feel a little awkward, I think, with that. So I don't know. It works pretty well if you do want to try that one out.
I love that. That is so awesome. I was going to say something about the teams not switching, because I think this is less a virtual issue and more an issue with applying the right process to the right situation. Because I've been through self-selection. This was a team totally separate from labs at Capital One that had caught wind about self-selection and wanted to try it. And they had almost no one switch teams because they were happy with the teams that they had. And there was really no good reason for them to run a self-selection event. And I think that if you do run one and no one switches and people say that they're happy, that might be an indication that you actually probably didn't need to even do it. It's a really cool process, and I understand why some of us as coaches are like, let's do this. But there are instances where people are in a pretty good spot, and if they are, they will not move that much.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jeff.
I was going to say, the one I just did, there wasn't a lot of movement. We actually added another team. So it was pretty interesting. Basically, one person, one or two people from each team just left, and they met the guardrails, but that formed the new team, and all the other teams just stayed the same. But if one more person would have moved, it would have had a cascading effects that lots of things would have had to change. And like we had conversations, and they almost moved that person in and out, back and forth, and so it could have gone wholly one different direction. But they made that decision, and I think, to me at least, and what they told me afterwards was like it was empowering because we had the choice, and someone didn't say this is just what you're going to do, even though they agreed with that might have been what somebody would have did, but it could have gone multiple different ways.
True.
So real quick, I want to step back to the process just a little bit, because I like how tactical this is. And I want to kind of have like a little bit of a playbook coming out of this for people that might be interested in performing this or executing on it. So we talked about the pre, we went through the during, right? The actual event itself. So we've got, rally the troops, have each of the owners, whether that's the product owners or managers or whatever that happens to be, give a pitch, right? Talk about the skills, talk about the why me, why this team, et cetera. And then, we're recommending, based on our experience, about 3 rounds, about 10 minutes for each round. And that second round is likely kind of throwaway, but you still go through and maybe magic happens. And then at the end of it, some type of team building or, a happy hour type of activity. Anything we're missing inside of there for during that we would call it?
The retrospective at the end of once you have this selection. So there's like a team picture, team name. Let's do some type of a short retrospective on, I like the what would you change? What did you like about this? Kind of one. I think, Amber, you gave me this idea of the one word cloud. I like that one too. Like, how would you describe this event? The survey afterwards, right? Those things are all good things to like validate, like, did we get the outcomes we're looking for? And then measure, like any good experiment you run, you should have some type of measurement. At the one organization that I ran it in, we had a good measurement. We actually did a survey, like their employee engagement stars survey was shortly after that. And where they were before that was like 38% employees felt engaged at work or something like that. And they're at 98 3 months after the team selection. And so, that was validation, like, hey, after we got into this and we did this, like, it made a huge difference. And granted, there are a lot of things we were doing during that time that wasn't just the team selection, but I think that was a big part of it.
And that's exactly where I wanted to go. So like, what's the post, right? What are some things that we want to consider doing or thinking about afterwards? So we've said it a few times now, right? A survey. But is there anything else that we should be thinking about to kind of close out, or maybe, a few weeks to a few months after the team self-selection process?
Well, you want to have a transition plan. There's always going to be people that have moved, and there might be new skills that are being earned as well. So there needs to be an understanding for the business before the event of what that looks like. Are we going to take a sprint? Are we going to take a couple sprints and transition over? What does that mean? Who's going to be working on what team when? And just really make sure that you stick to that plan so that people have the time to transition. There have been organizations that I've run this at that did a poor job of planning the transition in that they just expected the teams to switch and boom, it's going to be great and the velocity is going to go up and plateau and everything's perfect. That will not happen. So you need to build in that time. So if you have tight deadlines, you might want to wait till after you release before you run a self-selection, because this will push some things out, but in a good way. It's a little bit of short-term pain for long-term gain. So you want to think through that.
Yeah, this last one I did, I think we planned it to be up to a month transition from the work back and forth to the teams. Granted, there wasn't a ton of movement, but it pretty much was done in a week, And the one before that we did, like, we kind of had refinement and, let's set up our definition of done, and let's working agreement, set up our cadences, and like go through that part after it. Like that was the next week, and then we were off sprinting. So, and then there was some stuff that, we had to pass back and forth between teams that wasn't going to be long-term, but like it's what you had to do in the temporary, and we all understood that. And I think those are all things and guardrails that we kind of talked through and set up with like the product owners and management, like before we even started this, saying like, this is how we're going to handle it. We don't know exactly what's going to happen when we go through this, but there's going to be something that comes out of it. And here's kind of our plans to address it after the team self-selection. So I love that you have a plan and you shared that plan, and that you don't have it all figured out with the teams, because I don't know what you're going to do. Like, a lot of this is up to you.
I feel like that's just I like how you phrase it. What was popping into my head was that's just reminding everybody the fact that these are new teams, right? Regardless of whether we had a manager assign them or they did it themselves, these are new teams, and we've got to allow for that growth process to happen afterwards. Like, what is that new definition of done? What's our sprint cadence? Are we changing that? Like, how are we going to work with one another? Who's got to build new skills, and how are we going to check in with that, right? The same stuff, but still just as important, regardless of how we got to that new team starting point.
One of the cool things, I don't know if we talked about this or not, Jeff, but that one where we ran the one together, it was a couple weeks afterwards. They said, make your own space. And so they were all in cubicles, and they let them just say, tear them down, get rid of them. Here's your budget. Figure out where you want to be in the building and how you're going to manage that. And they got together and they said, well, we'll take this if you take this. Well, we want this. And they had this big negotiation. They settled on the areas, and then they just made it their own. And they took out dumpsters of stuff that it was cleaning up space. They didn't need it anymore. And it was, things that they needed to get rid of. And I mean, they owned it. It was their space now. And that was a good team building, bonding experience, I think, for people too.
I think that's an incredibly healthy thing for business to allow the new teams to do. They definitely need to move around, but to rebuild something, add a couch, add your pictures or whatever, that's fantastic. I love that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine going through this super cool self-organization, self-selecting activity, and then going back to your cubicle where you've sat for the past 3 years, 5 years, whatever that may be, right? And I think that that's part of the offsite, right? And this is one of the things that we had done, was actually go someplace external to the organization, like this complete new environment, something completely different. So we're not comfortable, so we're already out of there. And then again, it would just be a little bit ironic to go right back to how we were doing things before. We're just quote unquote on different teams now. So I agree with that. I think that's as much as a change of mindset as a change of environment.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think those are the main steps. I mean, we've spelled it out, and you feel like you got an outline here. The hard part is facilitating the conflict, setting the expectations, the change management, and then just being flexible. It never goes, in my experience, the way you think it's going to go, and so you just have to be able to change your plan on a dime and be like, oh, I'm going to facilitate this because I feel like we have a need here and something's not getting figured out. And so I think you got to be prepared for that. And I think that's where someone who's done this before, or, someone who's good facilitation skills comes in handy, and maybe multiple people, depending on how big we're talking.
Yeah. And I think there's a few resources out there that can spell this out. Like, you're a visual learner and you're listening to us and you're like, I want to see this.
Yeah.
Nomad 8, which was David Mole and Sandy Mamoli, who wrote the Creating Great Teams books, the consulting company in New Zealand. They've got a great one-pager out there. You can just search for self-selection one-pager and it'll pop right up. The Creating Great Teams book is awesome. I read it, I think, on a flight from DC to Boston, so it's super bite-sized, but very, very packed full of good ideas. I do have a blog. It's amberarfield.com, and I've put all of my self-selection stuff up there too. And I don't know, Jeff, do you have more places where you like to go for self-selection resources?
Those are all good ones. There's one on the less large-scale Scrum website that they've got an article out there that I've referenced to. And then, I don't know, I've created, basically what we talked about. I've created an outline. I share that outline with people, create a canvas, walk through the plan, make sure everything's going to, how you're going to facilitate it. And that's kind of how I do it. And even a poorly ran team self-selection is better than somebody picking it. So I think just trying something and getting started with it is worth it. And you're gonna have better results, I think, than somebody else picking it.
Absolutely agree.
Cool. So that's good. So we really covered team self-selection. I do want to jump into the capstone thing that you're doing, Amber, because I don't know too much about. You just told us about this before we started recording. Mentioned it in our emails back and forth, but tell me more about what you're doing with the University of Madison.
Yeah, so UW-Madison has had capstone courses, and other schools have had capstone courses for a while for their engineering departments. Basically, what they are is a partnership with a company outside of academia. They'll provide some mentors, they'll provide a project, and for a whole semester or for a whole year, the students will work on that project and gain some real world experience. And so what we're doing now is we're taking that idea and bringing it to the computer science department, which has not done this before. So I am teaching a course. It's a pilot course this semester, and it's all virtual, which is really interesting because when you talk about Agile, Agile principles and Agile methodologies, a lot of times they say be together in a space. Well, that's no longer possible. So how do we make do with what we have here? So basically, we've got 3 companies this semester. It's AmFam, Epic, and Capital One who have come up with projects for all the students to work on, and we've got 2 teams working on each project. The reason is that's kind of a well-known innovation technique is take a couple of teams, have them work on the same problem and see how they solve it very differently, and then you can hone in on the best way to do it. But we've got 6 teams of 4 students, and I'm taking them from the very beginning. So you mentioned Lean Canvas earlier. We did our first iteration of a Lean Canvas right after we picked our projects. And what do you think the problem is you're trying to solve? What do you think some solutions are? What do you think your unique proposition is? There's a lot of other insurance companies. How are you gonna build, in this case, an app to help collect data? How are you going to do that better or in a more user-friendly fashion, that sort of thing? And I'm taking them from the very beginning, which is, in our case, like trying to figure out what to build. And I talked about design thinking. We talked a little bit about Lean Startup. We're running a Google Design Sprint, not necessarily in 1 week because they're students and they're not dedicated to these projects, but we're doing it over 2 weeks, getting them comfortable with rapid prototyping and testing and talking to users and really getting feedback. And then we're going to talk through some of the methodologies that they'll actually use in the real world. So, the big ones, Kanban, Scrum, getting them actually using these techniques in class as best we can. Granted, they're not dedicated, so it's not a perfect environment, but it's way better than not trying it at all, which is what these students have done. And then working in the project in that fashion. And I'm going to sprinkle in some other interesting topics as well. So I've got guest speakers who are going to talk about DevOps and clean coding and business agility from the Business Agility Institute, and just really give them an overview of what to expect in the real world and what many companies don't do well. But if we can get these students to think in the right ways ahead of time, I think they're not only going to be individually more efficient, have a better career, and be able to work better in the environments that we have, but I think they're going to help drive the companies forward in a way that most students aren't equipped to do because they've gotten a very theoretical computer science education, but they haven't been able to dive into, okay, how do I actually do this in the real world? How do I use Git? How do I hold a retrospective effectively? That sort of thing. That's what we're doing in the class.
It sounds awesome. Sounds like a lot of really good information that not just capstone students could use, but a lot of people probably would enjoy. So that's awesome. That'd be great information to enter the workforce with.
No kidding. I'm super excited. I think the students are having a good time. They're right in the middle of their Google Design Sprint so far. So it looks like half the teams really get it when you're trying to think about, okay, what's your riskiest assumption and what am I going to test this week? Some of them have narrowed it down really well, and some of them are thinking far too big a picture. But you know what? That's exactly what we do in real life. And I love watching them struggle with the same things that we all do in the real world and getting the experience of overcoming, some of those key moments and overcoming, just basic things that we have to all the time. So.
Yeah, there was a little bit of irony in your statement about how did you phrase it? Something to the effect of this is how it is in real life. And I'd say it's almost not that way in real life. What I was excited about, what I heard was there's product discovery and there is product execution. Those are 2 very distinct phases when we're thinking about products. And all too often, it's the execution side that gets all the attention. But we forget there's this whole different side of the house. There's this whole different actions of discovery, forming assumptions, figuring out markets, et cetera. All of that stuff that is oftentimes overlooked or simply handed to us when we're thinking about product execution. So little bit of irony in there, but I like where you went with it. This can be driving factors in organizations, right? Setting students up for success to understand, why is this side of the house so important? And speaking from personal experience, right? I'm at a startup right now, and I think a lot of us take for granted when we're working at organizations that have already found product market fit, that have already hit that curve, and they've got products out there that are secured revenue that are coming in. Not where you're looking at your runway of the next 2 months and wondering, do I get a paycheck in 3 months or not, right? And that certainly drives a little bit of this experimentation that you want in there. But as I'm a little bit rambling here, not everybody wants that. Right? Not everybody wants that type of uncertainty and risk that goes into things. But I would say our products need that. Our products need experimentation. There should be a constant state of discovery, even after you found product market fit, right? It shouldn't be just executing a plan. Like, how is that plan come up with? What is the next strategic goals that we're going after? That is absolutely a skill set that our product developers, not just product owners, product managers, whoever, those are skills that everybody should be thinking about, because it's, man, I really am rambling here. But at the end of the day, it's not the laundry list of crap that we get done that's important. It's the outcomes that stuff is helping us achieve, right? And the better we can get at the discovery, formulating assumptions, formulating hypotheses, the better we're going to get at actually validating outcomes that come out the other side of this. So it is a good balance of both those sides of the equation, and I'm excited to hear about that.
Yeah, good. No, everything you said, everything you quote unquote rambled, I thought was a key point. And I'm really excited to see. I wish this class was longer, because we're not going to be able to go through the amount of iteration it's going to take to get through a full discovery cycle to really understand, all right, this is how to reach product market fit. This is what's going to move the needle for our customers. But they're going to get a little flavor of it, and I think that's better than nothing at this point.
Could you take the next cohort through it, like next semester, and just continue on the same projects, but we've experimented with these things already. Now you have this information. Now what do you want to do with it? And then hand it to them and say, okay, now you have another semester to figure out where you want to go.
We talked through that, and I think that's a very viable direction that this course could take. Like I mentioned, it's a pilot right now, and we're just doing the one semester, but it could easily be turned into 2 semesters. And in fact, a lot of the capstones end up being that way. And there's a lot of precedence for similar classes in other institutions. For example, I guest lectured at a Harvard Business School class. It was Product Management 101 and 102, and it was an entrepreneurial course. And what they did was they basically took the first semester for the discovery piece of things, and they brought their own ideas. So these students were working on projects that they eventually might want to turn into their own companies, but under the guidance of a really smart professor and a lot of great guest speakers that could give them kind of the real world flavor. And then I think the second semester was more about, okay, how do you execute? How do you build a roadmap, and how do you run these teams? And I really like that kind of cadence. So it's very possible that we'll figure out that this is way too short, and we'll need to expand it. And I think that's exactly what a pilot's for, is for learning those things up front.
You mentioned those 3 companies. I think it was AmFam, Epic, and Capital One. Are they actually bringing customers to the table for these student teams to be engaging with and interacting with, or is it more those companies act as stakeholders providing feedback on the development efforts of the student teams?
Right now, it's more that they're providing that stakeholder view, and they're answering questions. We are going to lean on them a little bit. So next week is when we're doing our first round of testing with users. And the students, because it's such a short semester, are still trying to work out, okay, who is that group that I'm trying to target? So they started last week with huge ideas, many different groups that they were going to go after. And we said, nope, take a step back, pick one of those, let's narrow it up. And they're coming to the table with that information. From there, we're going to lean on our mentors to help us bring customers to the table. And we'll probably end up doing something that in the real world we never want to do, which is pull in your friends and family. Well, it might just be perfectly fine to do that in this case, especially since we're in the middle of COVID and no one actually wants to meet up in a coffee house these days. So we're going to do a little bit of everything.
Yeah, I would suspect, as much as I was talking about, discovery and execution, but also just the thought of being arm in arm with a customer, right? Like putting something in front of a customer, getting real world feedback. Like if you can set that expectation of this is how we should be developing a product, like right there with our customers, every week we're giving them something, every week we're getting feedback on it, and really make that distinction between your customers' feedback and your stakeholders' feedback. Well, okay, customer is a stakeholder, but I think you know what I mean by that statement, right? Like that's the secret sauce right there, I feel like, right? When you're putting your customer first and you've got this nice balance between discovery and execution, and you're just constantly looking to delight a customer. I mean, that's it. Like that's the secret sauce right there. If your students can figure that out, like A+, they're well on their way to success in whatever they're going to be working on in their future.
Yeah, and they'll be spoiled for when they go out into the real world, because I don't know about you two, but I've never worked in an organization that got that quite right.
Yeah, not many, but it's awesome when they do, and it's usually for a short-lived or small project or product, or a piece, that does this. But we're out there, Jeff and I know at least, are nudging companies to do more and more of this. So every time, and I notice this whenever I have people that come from college, if they've had these classes that you're talking about, and they have some of this exposure. It's just, yep, we've done something like this in the past. Now let's do it in the professional world, like where we're doing this every day and spending our whole career working on it. I think they buy into the ideas. They're ready to jump in with both feet, and they don't need as much nudging, right? To try some of these experiments, go talk to a customer or something like that.
Absolutely. It's always good to have an ally in the room too. So that's what I'm trying to do is produce more of those folks that are going to go out to the businesses you two are working with, and be the ones to be like, yeah, we tried this and it worked really well. You guys, everyone get on board. Like, let's do that.
Yeah. That's awesome. Well, Amber, it is getting late, and I know you've got kiddos that you probably have to put to bed. So, thanks for coming on the podcast. Thanks for recording with us. It was I was learning so much from these conversations, and thanks again. So, at this time, is there anything you want to plug? Anything else you want to promote? I know you talked about your blog. But is there anything else you want to add?
Honestly, no. Like, I had so much fun hanging out with you and talking shop here. So thank you for inviting me. Always a pleasure to talk to you, Jeff, and Jeff Molesky. I haven't done a lot with you, but this is awesome. So thanks for that. And no, nothing much. And I haven't even been writing on my blog very much, because I'm doing the same thing that everyone else is doing, which is work, some of this side stuff, and kids schooling. So there hasn't been a lot of writing lately, but we'll get back to it eventually.
Nonetheless, we'll put it in the show notes. So
perfect.